Hi, this is Curt Robbins with Higher Learning LV in Las Vegas, and welcome to Curt's Cannabis Corner. This week, I've got some exciting guests, and we're talking about the topic of cannabis consumption lounges, which has come into the news recently because the state of Nevada passed a law. It's quite liberal in some respects, and other respects it has a lot of restrictions. We've got Alana Armstrong from Aldous PR agency in Toronto.
Well, thank you for having me back, Curt.
And my other guest is Alex Brough, the creative development director at Kaneh Ventures. He's out of Aspen, Colorado.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm also the current president and operator of Cannabition Cannabis Museum in Las Vegas. We were open until COVID and we were moving to Planet 13. Now we're going to be opening around the second quarter of 2022.
Which is even more reason for us to talk to you and for you to educate our viewers because you're right in the middle of that action. So Mr. David Rheins from beautiful Seattle, Washington, Executive Director of the Marijuana Business Association. What do you think about this whole consumption lounge scene as a nation throughout the United States?
It's inevitable. It's just part of the normalization, the mainstreaming of cannabis. The story, the news is that it's taken us so long for it to manifest. Many markets have talked about cannabis consumption lounges for years. I've been going to Amsterdam since the 70s and enjoying consumption in a marketplace where cannabis is still illegal. So the fact that we're now at 19 legal states plus territories and we're still not featuring consumption lounges just shows that it's a pent-up demand that's going to go gangbusters once it's rolled out.
Alex, you're right in the middle of this and you've got some stuff going on in Las Vegas. What's your take on the current status of the lounges in the United States?
I'm really excited that the issue of social consumption is, happening and becoming part of the forefront. I think the more we can standardize cannabis in general and mainstream it, the better. We're really excited to be a part of the forefront of what social consumption looks like. I think there's a lot of ways to skin this cat more than just lounges. I think the word lounge is kind of disingenuous to what's happening, as there's just so many ways to approach the subject.
Should we really think more in terms of tourism or hospitality, Alex?
I think it's going to be a major boon for tourism in general. It's not really right that we're able to sell hundreds of pounds of cannabis a day in major tourist locations and not have a place for people to consume in a safe and legal manner. I think we all have heard all the stories in Las Vegas about a lot of people being upset that they smell cannabis all over the strip and they smell cannabis all over the place. I'm really excited to be able to provide a safe place where people can learn and consume and enjoy cannabis and celebrate cannabis, really.
Like you say, it seems like a necessary element that without it, we're missing a major piece of the pie.
I'm also really excited about the different social equity aspects to social consumption. I think, it's just another avenue for people of color and minorities and people with disabilities and to have an avenue to get involved in the cannabis industry.
Now, Alana, what's your perspective on the lounges from Canada?
I was introduced to cannabis consumption lounges a little bit earlier on, like when I first started consuming cannabis, really. I visited Amsterdam and we did have lounges in Toronto up until really recently. Pretty much all of them have been closed down. The one that sticks out in my mind, Hotbox, was, one place that it was almost like a dream. Does this really exist? A place where you can go and sit and have a cookie and a coffee and vape your weed? Like Alex said, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I'm sure we haven't seen even, scratch the surface of all of the different iterations that we could see. What words besides lounge would you suggest?
We're doing a museum that's kind of based around the Museum of Ice Cream. It's really more of an Instagrammable picture moment and also an opportunity for brands to be able to market and expose themselves to pre-qualified consumers. We're not really taking the traditional route of social consumption where people will come in, sit at a table, order some pastries, maybe some coffee, smoke a joint, maybe meet people. We're really hoping to have cannabis being consumed in picture moments throughout our exhibits. I think there's so many ways to go about this. There's like the sushi and blunt rolling classes. There's yoga and cannabis, all these different ways to go about it. I think the word lounge kind of pigeonholes people's minds into thinking that it's just the traditional Amsterdam, Vancouver, Blunt Brothers kind of model. And I think we're going to see a lot of different iterations, and I'm really excited to see what that looks like.
What's interesting is that we're already seeing a lot of iteration. Weed and yoga, they've been doing that at Happy Monkey in New York. You can find these private clubs. So in Oregon, in Portland, there's a pretty famous club, the Northwest Cannabis Club. And there were always consumption lounges as part of all the farmers markets. There was a place where, we called them smoking tents. The other model that I'll suggest is it's not always just smoking, because it's not just a retail scenario, as you point out, Alex.
I think cannabis has been only available in private settings. People have been kind of demonized by feeling like they won't be accepted in it. And I think we all know how social cannabis is. I mean, right. I can't imagine any of us haven't been to concerts, lit a joint, and had 10 new friends. It's how you make new friends. And it's also a really good way to kind of, have a litmus test of, am I going to enjoy this person? Am I going to like this person? Like, I really find that cannabis creates a bridge to be able to engage with people that you don't know and you might not agree with, but it's something that is common ground.
Yeah, and my experience with cannabis as a kid it was sort of the misfit toys club. If you were an oddball who didn't fit into maybe some of the mainstream. So cannabis, in my experience, was always part of a social thing. Of course, because it was illegal, you needed a social network in order to acquire it. Right. And so it was all about, did you have some? And if you had some, you shared it with your friends. And if you didn't have some, they shared it with you.
Alex, tell us more about Cannabition and the project in Las Vegas that had to be put on hold due to the lockdown and pandemic.
Cannabition, the first iteration, opened in 2018. We were open for a year. We were on Fremont Street and Las Vegas Boulevard. The first iteration, we learned a lot, and we definitely did some things that we're changing in the second iteration. We had just signed a lease with Planet 13 when the COVID-19 hit. We were in the middle of kind of building out the Cannabition 2.0 model and moving to Planet 13 when COVID hit.
The Planet 13 model is really a cannabis ecosystem. So there's a dispensary, there's a retail, you can get food, go to the museum, get educated. It really is a tourist destination. I think that's the future. You tie that together with a canna-friendly hotel, and now you really have a destination pot tourism business.
I really think that Planet 13 is the premier cannabis tourist location in the world, as far as I can tell, and from what I've experienced. I can't really go too much into the plans of Planet 13 and what they're doing, but what their next phases are when it comes to embracing social consumption are going to be pretty incredible. We're really lucky and really fortunate to be a part of that.
Not so many years ago in Vegas, if you were caught with a seed or a stem, you were going to the Hooskow. Once legalization came through, the culture and the politics really embraced it as part of that full spectrum adult entertainment business.
We were so excited when the city of Las Vegas passed social consumption in 2019. We'd worked so hard to get that done. We were really fortunate to have Tick Segerblum be, such a supportive person. We've really experienced a lot of cooperation and support from a lot of politicians in Las Vegas.
And I've got flashing billboards with sight, sound, and motion on the strip. You've got a Planet 13 type of fully integrated experience. You have the gamification. I used to always go to the dispensary. Was my favorite one. If you spend more than $150, you spin the roulette and can win free weed. I mean, where in the world can you win free weed except for Las Vegas? This was not going to impact on the consumption of alcohol. It was not going to impact the consumption of shows, and then
I actually disagree with you a little bit on that. I think that the city and everybody else actually is really worried about the effects from alcohol. Alcohol consumption goes down about 25% in states where cannabis legalization happens. I think that the next major hurdle is federal legalization. The gaming commissions and the hotels, they're really not allowed to have any sort of cannabis on their premises because of federal illegalization. Once things are calmed down and federally legalized, or at least there's legislation in place that allows gaming places to allow cannabis in states where it is legal, I think that cannabis will be fully embraced by the casinos and by the hotels. But until then, they can't, because it really risks their casino license.
Having been all over the world in cannabis markets, I will tell you there's no place where cannabis is more normalized than in the city of Las Vegas.
I don't know. California and Colorado would have something to say about that.
I think if you went to places like Humboldt, those folks wouldn't think that California was doing a very good job.
I agree with that. I think it's really difficult to have a gray market and a green market exist in the same place.
Absolutely. As soon as legalization came about in Canada, the illicit dispensaries closed. It's not something that is likely to pop up anytime soon unless the legislation changes. For that to happen, I think it's just going to take some time, and it's going to take some case studies.
So Alana, do you think in Ontario and to a larger extent all of Canada that consumption lounges are going to remain underground and will not be legally regulated for the near future?
Yes, and I don't know if we're going to see very many of them pop up.
They really eschew anything that suggests lifestyle or adult consumption. It's all through Health Canada and highly regulated, and no branding, no fun, certainly no gamification.
Alex, what do you think about Nevada's new law? So we've got some other effort in New York and California. Denver has some tasting lounges that are legally using loopholes. What do you think about what's going on in Nevada?
I don't think that anybody knows what's happening really in Nevada right now. They basically came up with some very, very broad guidelines. And, over the next 18 months to 24 months, they're going to figure out what the landscape actually looks like and what the rules actually are. We're still working with lobbyists right now to be able to have social consumption in a museum, because there's still a lot up in the air as far as what Las Vegas is going to look like.
Right, which makes sense because the law is, one, not set in stone, but assume that it is. We are still developing the regulatory oversight language, and that is where lobbying and public participation pays off, right?
Yeah, 100%. And what I think is really interesting was New York. They went from by far one of the more conservative states to being one of the most liberal by far. I was in New York maybe 2 or 3 days after that legislation passed, and it was like such a relief to walk down the street and smoke a joint. I mean, I've done it a million times in New York, but to actually do that and feel comfortable,
right? And
nobody said a word to me. My hotel didn't say a word to me, just smoking outside the door. I'm really excited about what New York has to offer, and I can't wait to see what happens with them in the next 18 to 24 months.
Mr. David Rheins, you have a lot of friends and colleagues in New York. What do you think?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in New York, and all these markets have a unique approach, but New York is interesting in that anywhere that tobacco smoke is permitted, cannabis smoke will be permitted. And the police issued a memorandum, as Alex referenced, that said, we will not arrest you for smoking weed in public. And so the loophole in New York is that there are cigar bars. There are places where you can legally smoke, pretty upscale, cool clubs that cater to 21 plus audience. One would think that those will be the first places. Number two is there is a long history of private clubs. I was a friar. I think there's money coming in that's well-intentioned, and East Coast money is certainly looking to direct that way. You're seeing much more social equity in these new East Coast markets than you did on the initial West Coast markets, for sure.
Yeah, like Connecticut, their social equity is...
and Massachusetts.
Perhaps some of the best in the nation. Alana, You come on business to Las Vegas sometimes. In the future, when you come and there's lounges, what are you going to seek as a consumer and a cannabis consumer in your lounge or canna bar or entertainment
Canna
environment?
massage, her canna massage treatment.
Yeah, I like that actually. I think I like an experience that's maybe a little bit cleaner, a little bit more refined than I've been used to. It's kind of the corner dive bar vibe, very smoky.
Take a little less dive, a little more ventilation.
Yeah, yes, a little more ventilation. Honestly, Joe Rogan himself has stories of one lounge in particular in Toronto, a comedy bar, and it's just this tiny little thing. It is definitely now gone, but it just got so smoky in there that you really didn't have to bring your own stash. You could just sit there and really get a second degree high.
My kind of lounge.
I think that's the really exciting thing. Vegas, for example, has some of the finest restaurants in the world. And certainly up here in Seattle, some of our great chefs like Tom Douglas have embraced infused cooking. I would see that would be a major attraction as part of this public consumption opportunity.
Vegas has all of the tools necessary to put this into play in a number of different ways. Something for everyone. That's what Vegas is great at.
I'm actually a little concerned about edibles in restaurants, particularly with new consumers. I find that edibles for new consumers, if not taken in the right amount, can be extremely narcotic. And I worry that could give a bad look actually to our industry. In 2015, when I worked for Native Roots, we did the first publicly embraced cannabis parties in a public place in the downtown core of Aspen. We worked with Cultivating Spirits and my friend Phil. Phil presented an incredible experience where he paired wine, food, and different strains of cannabis. For every single portion that came out, you got a new strain of cannabis and a new wine. To me, that was so interesting, and I had the best time, and I felt it was super safe, and there was a massive educational aspect to it, and I was so excited about that. When it comes to edibles, people are going to have to be really careful in how they consume that in a restaurant setting. And how are they going to dose properly? You can't just like spray cannabis on something. For me, it's,
sure you can.
I know you can, but for me, like I can take 20, 40, 60 milligrams, no problem. But I know people that take 2 to 5 milligrams and they're, high as a kite.
Thank you very much, Curt, for having me back. It's been a pleasure to talk cannabis consumption lounges with you all. And if anybody would like to invest in my cannabis hammock cafe, you can reach me, Alana Armstrong on all social media, or you can get in touch with Alan Aldous at Alan Aldous for your PR and communication needs.
Mr. Alex Brough, thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation. I'm really excited to be on the forefront of working with social consumption. Cannabition is going to be a really, really fun environment for people to experience cannabis. If you would like to reach me, my email is alex@cannabition.com. And again, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Curt, for organizing this discussion. Alana is brilliant and funny as always. And I really enjoy getting the update from Alex about Cannabition and what's happening in Vegas. And to me, what we're talking about is the continuing saga of the mainstreaming of cannabis and how it's going to be integrated into all aspects of our lives. And consumption is just the bleeding edge of that normalization. So super exciting conversation.
Normalization, baby.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to all of my guests this week: Alana Armstrong with Aldous PR agency in Toronto, Alex Brough out of Aspen with Cannabition, an exciting project that's coming to Las Vegas. And of course, my thanks to the one and only Mr. David Rheins, Executive Director of the MJBA in beautiful Seattle, Washington. That's a wrap for Curt's Cannabis Quarter number 10. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Now, Alana,
everybody.
Bye. Thanks for stopping by.
I would
Perfect.
invest in that hammock hotel idea for sure.
Hammock.